This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
The Ethiopian military says it will take control of the Tigray region's capital in coming days. Dozens feared dead in Zimbabwe mine collapse as rescue efforts continue. And Iran accuses Israel of killing its top nuclear scientist in an assassination attack near Tehran. Welcome to Africa Live on CGTN with me, Beatrice Marshall, in Nairobi. Also coming up on the program, Zimbabwe bets on local procurement to boost recovery in 2021. And Ahly fans burst into celebration following their club's epic 2-1 victory over Zamalek in the CAF Champions League final. Let's begin in Somalia, where at least 6 people have been confirmed dead after a suicide bomber blew himself up in an ice cream shop. No group has claimed responsibility for the Friday attack in the capital, Mogadishu. According to the country's information ministry, 8 others were injured. The Islamist insurgent group Al-Shabaab, which is allied to Al-Qaeda, frequently carries out bombings in the capital and elsewhere.
A suicide bomber exploded at the entrance, and we can confirm that 7 people died, 6 people and the bomber, and 2 others were wounded. These youth were very talented, and they had finished studying and worked for their country.
Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has once again ruled out dialogue with leaders in the northern Tigray region to end the fighting. For more on this developing story, let's bring in our correspondent Girum Chala, standing by for us in Addis Ababa. Girum, the federal forces are claiming gains in several towns near Tigray's regional capital. What more are you hearing?
Beatrice, what the government called the final assault of its law enforcement mission in the Tigray region state is now on its second day. And overnight, top army commanders have briefed the media. They say that so many gains have been made against the TPLF special force and the militia there. And about 5 strategic locations have been now captured by the ENDF. And these cities are very close to the capital city of the Tigray regional state, Mekelle itself. The army is said to be about 50+ kilometers away from the capital city. And the war is now ongoing as well around the mountains of Mekelle city. And also the Ethiopian National Defense Force, Air Force itself, is also engaged using its planes and drones attacking strategic military locations. So the Ethiopian army generals are saying that in the coming 2 days, perhaps the Mekelle city will fall under their arms. From the other side, there is no information so far, as communication remains to be cut off, Beatrice. So this is what we know so far.
Are there any, is there any progress, though, in the peace talks between the Prime Minister and the African Union?
As you've said in your intro, the attempt being made especially by the African Union, sending 3 prominent African former leaders, also trying to speak to the Prime Minister himself, we're not really working when it comes to the attempt of resolving this ongoing conflict in Ethiopia through peaceful means, Beatrice. The Prime Minister is adamant to the fact that this is an internal matter and Ethiopia wants to resolve its own problems through the law enforcement military mission that has begun. And he said that it is now perhaps few days away from the conclusion of that mission. And the law enforcement mission wants to disarm the military that is being fighting against its national defense force. So the African Union's mission of attempting to resolve this through dialogue is not really working. But we know that the Prime Minister wants to speak to civic society from the Tigray region and state. He wants to speak to legal political parties from that region, except TPLF and the NDD at the same time. So the peace talks can only be coming after the end of the mission, but other parties can still have engagement with the government through roundtable discussions, Beatrice.
Girum Chala joining us there from Addis Ababa. Thank you. Search and rescue operations have been underway for around 40 informal miners trapped underground at a mine in Bindura town, some 70 kilometers from Zimbabwe's capital, Harare. At least 6 miners have so far been pulled out of the mine after it collapsed on Wednesday. CGTN's Farai Mwakutuya brings us the story from the capital.
The Ministry of Mines has mobilized its engineering department and equipment from large mining companies to carry out the search and rescue, but efforts are being slowed down by underground water and disrupted by other miners attempting to get into the shaft.
The dewatering exercises, we are aware that now it's rainy season, and that place actually, the levels that they're mining is a water table. Unfortunately, these illegal miners would want to continue doing operations because as of this morning, another set of 9 miners were rescued again from a different shaft that they entered while its rescue operations were occurring simultaneously on the other end. They were trying to enter the mine a different angle.
The rescue efforts highlight the challenges authorities face trying to regulate informal mining. Accidents of this nature are a common occurrence here because often these informal miners illegally encroach into abandoned and disused mine shafts that are no longer structurally sound. They do not adhere to the safety guidelines when they operate and often don't have the appropriate protective equipment, which means they often end in fatalities. Mining associations are engaging government to help curb accidents.
What we have been trying to lobby for the Ministry of Mines or government to do was to expedite the issue of formalization. Because once we formalize all these disused mines, the Ministry of Mines will actually look into it, the use it or lose it policy, the expropriation of mines that are not being utilized so that they are actually going to be put into proper use. Because as long as we are going to have illegal mining activities, these accidents are actually surging in the country.
2 other incidents of trapped miners have been reported during the month of November alone. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
AstraZeneca, the pharmaceutical company working with Oxford University to develop a COVID vaccine, is promising to run a new series of tests just days after revealing their initial results from tests in the UK and Brazil. There are questions about the reported efficacy rates, which varied between 62% and 90%. This stems from an error made during the testing, which led to a higher effectiveness rate. CGTN's Lolo Abdafid reports.
Much of the UK government's economic optimism for 2021 rides on the back of a reasonably priced, effective knockout blow to COVID-19. This week's jubilation is now tempered, with AstraZeneca and Oxford University undertaking additional work on their potential vaccine. An error during testing led to half a dose being given initially, before a full dose a month later. But the error paid off. Researchers found that dose level resulted in the vaccine proving to be 90% effective in preventing COVID-19. But when 2 full doses were given in the same time frame, it had an efficacy rate of 62%.
I think we shouldn't be concerned or too puzzled by the fact that giving a small dose and then a bigger dose has a better effect than giving 2 large doses. The immune system behaves in very complicated ways in order to tolerate some things and yet react to others.
AstraZeneca is a multinational pharmaceutical company based in Cambridge. Its turnover last year was over $24 billion and has a portfolio of products for many major diseases. But questions are asked over its testing and the dosage error, something which also affected the value of its shares. That's forced AstraZeneca's chief executive to respond. Now that we've found, he says, what looks like a better efficacy, we have to validate this, so we need to do an additional study. AstraZeneca and its partner Oxford University promises the new research will be international. The UK government has reserved 100 million doses and has also bought about 40 million doses of the Pfizer vaccine, enough for roughly a third of the UK population. Despite the recent concerns, it's pushing on with regulatory approval of the AstraZeneca jab. The UK Prime Minister, for one, is hoping new tests will lead to less confusion for economic and social reasons.
We now have reason to hope that by spring, community testing and vaccines will combine to end this era of restrictions. But to get there, we must first navigate a hard winter when the burden on our NHS is heaviest.
The race to provide an effective vaccine will enable the return to some kind of social normality and to stimulate economic growth. There are likely to be some who will be cautious about the safety of a vaccine after only a few months of testing. Yolo David, CGTN, London.
The African Union is working with member states to coordinate the purchase and delivery of COVID-19 vaccines for when they become available and are approved. The World Health Organization says 3 vaccines are demonstrating high levels of efficacy. The World Bank has announced it is offering $12 billion to assist the continent in vaccine acquisition. CGTN's Coletta Wanjohi spoke to the Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in Addis Ababa.
The light at the end of the COVID-19 tunnel is peeking through. Preliminary results from 3 vaccine candidates have shown incredible promise. But in Africa, there are concerns that citizens could be last in line after developed nations pre-ordered billions of doses. Being locked out would not only leave hundreds of millions vulnerable, but could have a wide-ranging impact on Africa's ability to recover and could lead to discrimination.
We are very concerned as a continent that once these vaccinations start in a developed world, there will be stringent conditions that says that you have to have a vaccine certificate in order to travel. And that will become, we've already seen some airlines indicating that once vaccines are available, they will need a vaccine certificate to travel.
The Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says the target is to immunize at least 60% of Africa's population. 3 contenders are being considered: the Moderna and the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccines from the United States and the AstraZeneca jab from the United Kingdom. Preliminary data from late-stage clinical trials has shown at least 90% efficacy in all of them. The African Union says it is in talks with the vaccine manufacturers through COVAX, a global initiative co-led by the World Health Organization to help ensure equitable access to COVID-19 vaccines. But the Africa CDC says there are other challenges beyond just a vaccine being available. According to World Health Organization, 40 African countries are still not fully ready for vaccine acquisition.
We have to look at the delivery part of this and say, well, if a vaccine was here today, in Africa today, how would we deliver it? I think the first 2 vaccines, that is the Moderna vaccine and the Pfizer vaccine, require very stringent storage conditions. The Moderna vaccine requires about minus 20-something degrees Celsius storage and distribution. The Pfizer vaccine requires about minus 70. And these are all conditions that will make it very challenging for us as a continent to begin to access those vaccines in a timely fashion.
Apart from the COVAX initiative, which guarantees the continent 20% coverage for any vaccine produced, the AU has so far mobilized $12 million from the World Bank and $5 billion from the Afrexim Bank. With additional funds from individual member states, the AU aims to achieve the remaining 40% coverage required to keep the continent safe. In mid-December, the Africa CDC is meeting with all member states to discuss in detail, once vaccines are acquired, how there will be equitable distribution of the vaccines according to each country's needs. Coletta Wanjohi, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
You're watching Africa Live, still ahead on the program. Iran accuses Israel of killing its top nuclear scientist in an assassination attack near Tehran. And a look at implications for Africa after the U.S. presidential election.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo, Juba, Johannesburg, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
I try to not let it affect me, but there are days when it does. I'm a human being, and to see patients in a hospital bed and their family members are not there, there's no one there to hold their hand, that human touch, you know?
I just hope everyone can remember that the situation is not permanent and that everything will get better eventually.
Iranian President Hassan Rouhani has accused Israel of killing his country's most prominent nuclear scientist, Mohsen Fakhrizadeh. The scientist's vehicle was attacked on Friday in the city of Abzad, about 40 kilometers east of the capital, Tehran. The assassination is threatening to escalate tensions between Iran and the United States and its close ally, Israel. Rouhani is reportedly saying that the assassination shows the hatred of Iran's enemies. He says the death of the scientist will not slow down Tehran's achievements. Clerical and military leaders are also threatening revenge. Sabas Nazari has more.
What we have here is a series of hallmarks of Israeli attacks, because Iran has repeatedly blamed Israel for those incidents in the past decade. You know, starting from different forms of assassinations to sabotage attacks inside Iranian nuclear facilities. You know, we had a chain of similar attacks nearly a decade ago, in which at least 3 Iranian nuclear scientists were assassinated right on the streets in broad daylight in the capital, Tehran. So in fact, they're talking about the past experience and past evidence in which there were car bombs, motorcycles. The nature of the attacks, in fact, have so many similarities that have made the Iranian authorities come to those conclusions. But aside from that, the heated debate here in Iran at the moment is about how those attacks were repeated, because we were expecting the Iranian officials to improve the security measures for those top nuclear scientists. So many believe, critics of the government believe that this could be revealing security fault lines and glitches, and this is something that has to be has to make them come to a point of reconsideration of how to prevent future attacks.
Earlier, we spoke to Wang Jin, an associate professor from the Institute of Middle East Studies at the Northwest University of China. He shared his insights on what the assassination means for Iran's nuclear program and relations between Iran and Israel.
Fakhrizadeh's death will actually influence the Iranian's nuclear development and research program from 2 dimensions. On the one hand, I think his death will actually anger the Iranian people, because we cannot forget that Iranian nuclear research and development program worked inside the framework of Iranian society, the Iranian country's apparatus. Well, on the other hand, of course, his death will actually become the new motivations for the scientists, especially the research and development programs, for them to fasten the more energy and the more motivations into this research program. So actually, in short, I think his death will encourage Iran to fasten their own nuclear program, and then to develop and fasten the pace of the development of the nuclear technologies in the future. And although some of the proof that indicated that actually it is Israel who launched and who implemented this assassination, but this is still unclear, because more proof are still needed. But I think in the future, it's a very dangerous sign for the bilateral ties between Israel and Iran. This assassination activity means a very blow to the dignity of Iranian's national security apparatus. And also it means that Iran should do something to revenge and to show their anger, to express their anger. If we look at the future, this assassination is actually the very, very dangerous move and will suggest the instabilities in this region.
In Libya, efforts are continuing to implement the latest ceasefire deal agreed upon by warring factions in the country. An election date has been set for the end of next year. However, forces on the front lines are yet to back down.
So far, the latest ceasefire in Libya is holding, and some elements of the truce have been implemented. Flights between rival cities of Tripoli and Benghazi have resumed, and foreign fighters have left oil facilities, the keys to the country's economy. But meetings of the Joint Military Commission in northern Libya have yet to make progress on other key demands of a UN-brokered agreement.
There are no clear solutions to achieve a reasonable agreement. These divisions that we see today, even in the political dialogue held by the United Nations in Tunisia. There are many who left the meeting in opposition of the dialogue, saying that they did not represent their ambitions in relation to the views on the necessary removal of the existing political bodies, citing they do not have the right to participate in such negotiations toward a new transition period, and that those in opposition believe it is necessary to return decision-making to the people and move directly towards an election.
Rival factions have yet to withdraw troops from frontline positions, open a major coastal road linking Sirte to Misrata, and rid their ranks of foreign mercenaries.
We support this agreement in Tunisia, but this agreement outlines the withdrawal of all armed groups from Sirte and Jufra, and only then will the roads be reopened. The agreement does not mention that the roads will be reopened and then the forces will withdraw. Therefore, we request that the agreement be implemented fast, which is the withdrawal of all forces in the central military region, specifically in Sirte and in Jufra, and the treatment of our wounded soldiers, the men who defended this area and held back these forces.
The UN-led diplomatic effort has set a roadmap to elections at the end of next year and implemented an audit of the central bank, which is split between the sides. However, a unified transitional government that will oversee the vote is yet to be set up.
The elections are contingent on two things. Firstly, Libya must have one government that will unite all political factions. And secondly, the elections in Libya need an all-encompassing reconciliation so that Libyans forget the past. For the election to go ahead, it needs a full reconciliation and a unified government that must study it in its entirety, even if it takes 2 years. But they must come out with a result.
The UN process helped resolve an 8-month Libyan National Army blockade of oil exports, which aggravated economic problems in the country. The third strand of talks beyond the military commission and the political process is economic negotiations. Enoch Sikoli, CGTN.
There's been much excitement in South Africa around the discovery of a skull belonging to a species that lived around the same time as ancient humans. The cranium was found at the Cradle of Humankind, which is a World Heritage Site. It could provide many critical answers to existence and how modern humans came about. CGTN's Julie Shire reports.
A 2-million-year-old skull unearthed in South Africa throws new light on human evolution. DNH 155 was found at the Cradle of Humankind's Dremelin Caves, which has the richest concentration of hominid fossils.
We were lucky enough to discover a beautiful cranium of, or the whole face and skull of a beautiful species called Paranthropus robustus. They're an ancient cousin of ours, and they're known for having these massive big teeth and this big flat face. And specifically, and quite unique to them, is the sagittal crest, or this big ridge of bone that goes down the back of their skull.
Paranthropus robustus survived and adapted to harsh climatic change, which went from extremely wet to drier conditions like we see in southern Africa today.
They do go extinct, but before they do that, they become very specialized, And they use those big teeth and these big faces to chew on really hard, fibrous foodstuffs. But what's fascinating is at Dreamland now, what we've been able to discover with DNH 155 is that actually they weren't able to chew on those hard food things initially, but then in a very, very short period of time during the climate shifting, they're able to develop those really quickly.
The hominine lived alongside ancient human ancestor Homo erectus for around 1 million years before dying out.
So we discovered Homo erectus. Well, we discovered it quite early, but we announced it earlier this year. So that was quite interesting because it's at the same site and the same time, but it's Homo, so it's related to us. And Homo erectus is the species that leaves Africa and goes on to populate the rest of the planet. So that's the next fascinating step in the study, is kind of understanding how these different human-like creatures pass out a landscape and who feeds on what and how did they potentially interact.
This has been one of the most significant discoveries to come out of the cradle of humankind. It's being described as the missing piece of the puzzle between modern humans and their predecessors. Julie Shara, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
America is reeling from a hotly contested presidential election, one which has been keenly observed across the world. With a change in administration potentially meaning significant shifts in U.S. foreign policy, analysts in Africa have been keeping an eye on possible implications for the continent. In this week's episode of Dimensions, I take you through an assessment of the U.S. election, its foreign policy, and Africa. Can a change of guard at the White House herald a U.S. foreign policy shift in Africa? Within the backdrop of perhaps the most divisive presidential election in the country's history, the U.S. may find it critical to repackage itself in order to once again differently project itself globally. And it could all boil down to how it chooses to use its soft and hard power. Billed, and rightly so, as an epic battle for the soul of America, the election has served as the sternest test for democracy. In Africa, the U.S. may shortly begin to grapple with the unenviable task of restoring trust in democracy, for years a key plank of its policy on the continent. Its commitment to ideals such as justice, human rights, democracy, and good governance may also come under increased scrutiny. A concept with mixed outcomes, democracy is still largely a work in progress on the continent. While the U.S. has strived to help integrate Africa in the global economy, build its capacity to deal with security threats, strengthen healthcare, and invigorate youth engagement, its ubiquitous footprint on the continent has served to counter the positive influence of other countries. This policy and its rigid nature has exposed gaps other countries have had to step in to fill: agriculture, trade, infrastructural development, energy, foreign direct investment, ICT, to name just a few sectors. And these players have done so more as a way of complementing America's role and not to compete with its interests in Africa. But is a US-Africa policy change likely? Perhaps a wait-and-see posture would suffice for now. A walk down memory lane shows a consistent path since the post-Cold War era. Republicans or Democrats, it hardly ever mattered who's running the show in Washington, D.C. A congressional bipartisan around African issues and entrenched institutionalized bureaucracies have underpinned and perpetuated this policy outlook. A split Congress and Senate will make dramatic policy changes even more unlikely. The hope that the incoming administration will be more responsive to Africa's needs and allocate more resources to the continent is possibly rooted in the belief that Democrats are more responsive to African interests. It is also worth noting that each American president has had their own signature Africa projects, from AGOA to Power Africa to President Trump's Prosper Africa. A conservative approach along these policy areas will likely persist. Perhaps the greatest hope for Africa will come from the way America engages globally and its trickle-down effects. Right now, the world is watching and is looking forward to an end to the US's zero-sum policy of America first and a quick return to the more inclusive win-win doctrine of multilateralism and globalization. Faced with existential threats, humanity is waiting with bated breath for viable solutions to a plethora of challenges, the most urgent one being the global COVID-19 pandemic. You're watching Africa Live, still ahead on the program. Zimbabwe bets on local procurement to boost recovery in 2021. And the young Egyptian that has developed a robot to diagnose infection.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Heading to Zimbabwe now, and the country's economy will grow by 7.4% in 2021 after a 4.1% contraction in 2020. That's according to forecasts presented by the country's finance minister on Thursday. While presenting his 2021 national budget to Parliament, Professor Mutuli Nkube said the stability achieved over the last 2 years will spur the ambitious growth. Here's Farai Mwakutuya with the details from Harare.
The focus in 2021 will be on sustainable and inclusive growth driven by agriculture, mining and manufacturing. Players in the latter have welcomed local procurement measures that will prop up domestic industries.
I think one of the things we would also highlight as far as local procurement is concerned is that that needs to be followed up with the supportive instruments or enforcing instruments as quickly as possible to make sure that as much as is possible, everything that can be procured locally should be procured locally.
Rebates were extended for the dairy industry and fertilizer manufacturers, although more concessions are needed to level the playing field.
If we could have less and less duty on raw materials, because we are importing raw materials from countries that we have to compete with. We are then competing with imported products, imported finished products, some of them coming from countries that we are importing raw materials from.
The finance minister is planning to increase revenue by targeting previously untapped resources. A monthly presumptive tax has been prescribed for the informal sector, but the crucial question remains whether these predominantly survivalist operators can bear it, which could see some of them go further under the radar.
2021 is definitely going to be a tough year. The minister is actually looking to increase revenue collection against a shrinking economy. So it's going to be tough on business. So you'll see an increase in informalization, you'll see an increase in dollarization.
Relief for the formerly employed has been given through widened tax brackets and focus put on job creation.
We've seen the minister coming up with clear employment creation and poverty reduction annual targets in the national budget. And there's also a strong synchronity or complementarity between the national budget and also the national development strategy, which in my view, I think that's positive.
5.5% of GDP will be set aside to fund capital projects that will help bridge a debilitating infrastructure deficit. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Senegal is the latest African nation to launch 5G testing. Mobile network operator Orange Senegal conducted the first test this week in partnership with Chinese tech giant Huawei. The event was unveiled during the second Senegal Digital Forum. Telecom operator Sonatel, through its subsidiary Orange, will lead this venture in the West African nation. Sonatel CEO Sekou Dramé said the launch of 5G internet will open up Senegal and the entire continent to the world.
Senegal is now able to launch its technology at the same time as many G20 countries. This will support the digital transformation of companies, institutions, the state and the public service. In addition to existing networks, 5G will make it possible to connect more people simultaneously with speeds never reached before.
The Ugandan ride-hailing startup SafeBoda has closed operations in Kenya, citing the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. SafeBoda connects passengers to motorcycle riders through a mobile app. The app began in Uganda before spreading to Kenya and Nigeria in 2018. Isabel Nakiria reports.
SafeBoda has pulled out of the motorcycle taxi market in Kenya. The company says the coronavirus hit hard at a time when it was struggling to expand. Apart from ride-hailing, SafeBoda was also connecting users to other online platforms like online markets, food delivery services, and financial transactions like airtime purchases.
A product like SafeBoda depends on a lot of funds and a lot of raising of funds. Had to go through a very difficult situation because not every investor is willing to invest during this difficult moment. So we had to pull in because we didn't have, to be honest with you, we didn't have all the finances to continue running the company.
Kenya started easing lockdown measures about 4 months ago, but the movement of people remained low due to fears of catching COVID-19. Around 4,000 motorcycle taxi drivers in Kenya have lost jobs following SafeBoda pullout, and many of them had lost incomes during the lockdown and were struggling to cope. SafeBoda says it could not sustain the business because the market environment was uncertain, posing threats to its operations in Uganda and Nigeria. Kenya's economy is one of the fastest growing in East Africa. SafeBoda says it enjoyed the competitiveness of the market and learned lessons.
It's a very difficult decision that we had to make, but we had to make it to be able to save SafeBoda because the economy is real tough, the situation is real tough. A lot of movement of people have been reduced. You know, when people are not going to churches, when people are not going to bars, when people are not going to school and stuff like this, you get to realize when people are now working from home and all meetings are happening from Zoom, you get to realize that movement of people is very, very limited. That means our business transaction will always continue to be low.
The pandemic has sparked many innovations, and tech entrepreneurs say the only way to stay in business is to learn to be creative.
We have to look into things around digital transformation. We need to skill as many youth as possible, equip them with the necessary digital skills and tools that they'll need to be competitive moving forward. We need to address challenges around access to necessary training on business development.
For now, SafeBoda will focus business in Uganda and Nigeria as it strategizes on whether it will return to Kenya when things improve. Isabel Nakiria, CGTN Kampala, Uganda.
Now, despite the tough economic climate in South Africa, Black Friday turned out to be another shopping frenzy. People queued at some places waiting for big retail stores to open to get their hands on specials. Sumitra Naidu reports.
Black Friday, usually held between October and November every year, normally kicks off the festive shopping season. It was no different this year despite COVID-19.
We came here to buy our kids Christmas clothes as well as New Year's. We came to Woodmead because they have big sales and we save compared to Rustenburg. We came from Rustenburg.
We got here last night at 9 p.m. and slept at the petrol station. The security guard told us we couldn't queue at that time as it was too early. So we went to the engine petrol station and slept in the car.
It's too early to tell whether Black Friday was as successful as previous years, but retailers are banking on the day, having gone all out with advertising specials.
So we've seen
a steady flow of customers coming in and buying the usual products that they normally buy during Black Friday. Last year we ran it over 5 days, which we called it Black 5 Days, and this year we're running it as Black Friday extended. We've taken into account the safety of our staff and our customers, and that is why we ran it for over a longer period so that we can really comply with the COVID protocols.
Consumer behavior in South Africa changed significantly this year because of COVID-19 and the lockdown. There's been a massive uptick in online shopping and overall e-commerce.
We've been doing very well on online. We've seen a very good growth. We've actually been growing from the start of the extended Black Friday. We've been seeing just above 80% growth on the online, and the customers have really made use of our online, I think because also of the COVID-19.
Some consumers, though, are old school and also look forward to shopping as a day out.
I prefer viewing the product because some of the stuff that we buy online, we get that it's not actually the product that we're looking for in terms of quality. We're from like Muthutlung near Brits, and we don't have any sort of a retail stores, so we like expected to save a bit of more money. That's why we're here. That's why we drove all the way.
It's been a tough year. South Africa is still in a deep recession that has been compounded by COVID, and unemployment is at a record high. Getting a good discount on something needed is a big deal. Sumitra Nadu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
On to recent technological advancements to curb the spread of the coronavirus pandemic. A 26-year-old Egyptian inventor has successfully tested a robot he invented to diagnose infection and post-infection medical care related to COVID-19. As CGTN's Daniela Pearson reports, the Sira version not only has human-like features, but could also be the next step to tackling the virus.
Mahmoud El-Komi may have changed how robots play a role in our day-to-day lives. His latest invention is being trialled to test for COVID-19 by taking the temperature of patients. It also warns people if they don't wear a mask.
The robot can conduct all these accurate tests while the doctor is in another room or outside of the hospital entirely. This will definitely lead to a decrease in the infection rate among the medical staff. It will also allow us to take better blood samples and will be a little bit more accurate than the human hand.
Sira version 3 has a human-like face and head with robotic arms. Mahmoud says Sira 03 can take blood tests, perform echocardiograms and X-rays. It can also help limit exposure to infection and prevent the transmission of the virus.
The government supported my idea, but now I need them to support me in applying it to facilitate mass production and have it in all hospitals. Just like what we did here in this hospital, we can do it in all of Egypt's hospitals.
With the recent surge in COVID-19 cases amid a second wave, Mahmoud said Sira could play a huge role in curbing the spread of the virus, in turn providing a means to return to normalcy.
This invention is very important during the pandemic. It reduces the infection rate to zero since everything is automated via the robot Sira.
Sira could be the next step in curbing the spread of the coronavirus. For Mahmoud, he hopes that he could secure investments and backing to turn Sira into a worldwide production. Daniela Pearson, CGTN.
And we still have more news for you here on the program. Here's what's ahead. How an organization in Kenya is turning washed-up flip-flops into amazing, colorful sculptures.
Join us in global business and see Africa through our eyes.
You're watching breaking news on CGTN.
In Kenya, one footwear company is concerned about high levels of pollution in the seas. To help counter loss of biodiversity, Ocean Soul has been cleaning up beaches along the East African coastline. The social enterprise specifically collects flip-flops and turns them into colorful toys and sculptures. CGTN's Wilkie Sanyabwa reports.
The artisan furrows his brow deep in concentration as his blade slices through the rubber. And from the multicolored block of discarded waste, a familiar shape emerges. Sometimes these craftsmen make birds, at other times they make marine animals. Thousands of discarded flip-flops bought at a cost of 30 US cents for a kilogram are weighed and then cleaned in preparation for use.
The flip-flops are collected from dump sites or water bodies. Once they are dry, we sand them to remove the remaining dirt and then pile them together to create a block. From that, you can carve out whatever you want to make.
When Ocean Soul was founded in 2014, its founders dreamt of providing a solution to a common environmental problem. Flip-flops are common, popular footwear. But they stay forever in landfills or make their way into the ocean, choking animals and plants.
A flip-flop is a poor man's shoe. It costs like $1. And the cost of fixing that flip-flop exceeds the actual cost of the flip-flop. So what you have now is a huge menace because everybody keeps on buying and buying and buying.
In 2019, the organization recycled about 1 million flip-flops, turning them into soft, colorful figurines, mostly sold in international markets. And until earlier in the year, the workshop employed 90 artisans. Francis started out as a wood carver.
It got to a point when wood became scarce and the government prohibited the cutting of trees. That's when we heard that someone was looking for people to carve rubber material.
Their work flourished until the COVID-19 pandemic took its toll, forcing Ocean Soul to scale down its operations. However, after several slow months, it is starting to pick up again. And one day soon, the enterprise hopes to expand its efforts.
We have received numerous requests from flip-flop prawn countries, for example, Brazil, Honduras, Indonesia, India, asking us if we can go to their countries and do the same. So we're trying to perfect what we have going on here and hopefully, go out to those countries and do exactly that.
But for now, these artists keep chipping away at the flip-flops. In their own way, they are helping to keep human, animal and marine plants afloat. The flip-flops in the workshop are a stark reminder of all the waste that finds its way into waterways and oceans every year, choking the marine life. However, in the very same breath, these beautiful figurines show that when it comes to environmental conservation, one little action can have a massive impact. Wilkie Sanyabwa, CGTN in Nairobi, Kenya.
Let's now take a look at your sports news. Here's what's ahead. Ahly fans burst into celebrations following their club's epic 2-1 victory over Zamalek in the CAF Champions League final.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your game.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
We start in Egypt, where scores of Ahly fans took to the streets in celebration after the Red Devils won their 9th CAF Champions League title by downing arch-rivals Zamalek 2-1 on Friday night. It was the first Cairo Derby final of Africa's Premier Club competition. CGTN's Adel Makhroui brings us the details of a historic night in Egypt.
Africa's biggest club football night was purely Egyptian this year.
Zamalek hoped to win the first CAF Champions League trophy in 18 years, while Al Ahly's target was to extend the club's continental titles record. The winner in this final takes all: a new African title, a ticket to the African Super Cup, and another to the Club World Cup.
This match is worth triple the achievements of any other. It's a great honor to host the final in Egypt. I'm proud that one more title will be registered under Egypt's name. But of course, everyone wants their own club to win.
5 minutes into the game, the Egyptian Red Devils took the lead with Amr Sulayya's header. The White Knights unleashed their offensive might, pressing Al Ahly until Shikabala got the equalizer from outside the box in the 31st minute. All match statistics were in Zamalek's favor, with exception to scoring, which Magdi Afsha tipped its scale towards the Egyptian Red Devils just 6 minutes before the main time ended.
Zamalek played very well today. They were great, but we had confidence that Al Ahly would win. I think Al Ahly could have played better though, but honestly, there were tough challenges like COVID-19. To win despite all these challenges is a great achievement.
The streets of Cairo burst in celebrations. Fans jammed the traffic. They sang and danced. They were not only celebrating a new African title, but also their first victory over Zamalek this season.
This is a different kind of happiness. It's a derby, the first of its kind final. This is history happening. We will tell the stories of this day to our kids and grandchildren. It's an event that might not happen in 100 years.
Pitso Mosimane has done it again. He defeated Zamalek twice in the African Club final. The first was in 2016 when he brought Mamelodi Sundowns their first title.
Phenomenal celebrations for Al Ahly fans in the Egyptian capital streets. It's the 9th African title, the first historic victory over an Egyptian team, and the 6th participation for the Red Devils in the Club World Cup. Adel Mahmoui, CGTN, from the middle of the biggest celebration.